Hello, and thank you for joining us for Bring Your Values to Work Day. I'm Rob Kaiser. I'm the Chief Values Officer at Revive Consulting and the creator of the Global Values Project. And I am joined today by fellow coaching colleague, collaborator, and a guy who's always got a great story to tell, David Frank Gomes.
Hi, Rob. Nice to be here.
Hey, thanks for joining us, David. You want to tell us a little bit about yourself? A quick background and bio?
Yeah, sure. I'm a co-active coach and a personal mentor who creates compelling conversations for the people I work with. And I use heart-centered wisdom with active coaching strategies to keep people moving forward in their personal and professional lives without losing track of what's really important to them.
That's powerful stuff, David. I'm so glad you're joining us today. David's background and experience with values started many years ago in his work as a spiritual coach, mentor, and teacher. And my experience and work with values started years ago in the corporate world. So I don't know that you can get much further apart for starting points on the same topic as you can from David and myself. And we're really curious to see what happens today in our discussion. We want to get together and find out what's happened. What happens when these two very different perspectives come together? Are we going to collide? Are we going to find some common ground? We're not really sure. And the hook that we're going to hang this discussion off of is the concept of it's around Bring Your Kids to Work Day. And it's this phenomenon that I've observed so many times, and maybe you have too, that when a company has a Bring Your Kids to Work Day, so many people show up so differently. These people that normally you may not necessarily like to hang out with or work with, they're nicer, they're communicative, they're collaborative, very, very different. And because we have so many people showing up in this different way, the entire workplace energy and culture is changed and transformed for that day just for the better. And it's funny, I've also noticed the day after the Bring Your Kids to Work Day, there's kind of this sense of a little sadness and a little loss. It's like, oh, wasn't yesterday great? Why couldn't every day be like that? And so that's why we're here. What if every day was Bring Your Values to Work Day and everybody showed up with a little bit more of their whole and complete selves? So let's dig in. David, why don't you kick us off with what are your thoughts on what might explain this phenomenon that happens on Bring Your Kids to Work Day?
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm very interested in creating change, long-term sustainable change for individuals and inside of organizations. So when you bring the kid to work day, you're bringing a high-level value with you. For people who have children, there is no higher level value than children. So they actually are face-to-face with their value. Now, what I notice in talking to senior HR people, leaders, change agents, and entrepreneurs, one word keeps coming up, and it's disengagement.
Mm-hmm.
So we're seeing record levels of disengagement, and my theory is that it is directly related to values, and there's three key areas that I have identified that I believe are responsible for the disengagement. And so that's the reason. I'll just go through the three of them, and then we can dig into them.
Yeah, share with us this connection. Let's hear it.
Yeah, the first one is that people simply aren't aware of their high-level values, whether they're individuals or actually inside of organizations. They're simply not connected to them, or they're connected to them in such a vague way that they fail to have any power. That's the first one. The second one is I really believe that for a value to be sticky, to make a difference, it's got to be a balance of head and heart. Real values always connect the two, right? So a lot of times in organizations, what they call values are actually goals or strategies.
Mm-hmm.
They connect to the head and the data, but they simply don't connect to the heart, so they're not sticky enough. And the third one, maybe the biggest issue, is overwhelm. We're living in a high-speed digital era, massive amounts of data, less time. What happens when you get overwhelmed? Just leave your values at the door. you know. And so I think this topic that you created is really a powerful metaphor, because it does ask us, we're going to spend the majority of our lives at work. If we're leaving our kids at home every day, then we're embodying some kind of values at all time. And since we're spending the majority of time there, especially inside of organizations, they not only need processes that work, that are simple and elegant, they need support along the way, because values, they change, they grow, they're rich. They're not just words.
So let me ask you something. I heard you say many people are leaving their values at the door. I get it. There's something crazy that happens. We walk through the door at work, and we leave this big chunk of ourselves, arguably the most important parts, outside. But I also heard you say we're always standing in a value. So if we're leaving these really true values outside the door, what is it we're standing in then when we're inside the office space?
Yeah, you know, in the wisdom traditions, they talk about the idea that one is always connected to something. And so, as a coach, I do saboteur work. So a really easy way to describe saboteur work is your evil twin, right? Your evil twin looks like you, talks like you, and dresses like you. But whereas you eat healthy organic food, your evil twin eats at McDonald's. Where you look for loving, kind, compassionate relationships, your evil twin wants to argue and always be right. So your evil twin is the shadow values. So when you're coming to work, if you're putting your values aside and you're taking on some other value, you're sitting inside of some kind of a shadow if it's not something you can use.
It sounds like we're tricking ourselves. We're trying to convince ourselves we're still showing up the way we should. But deep down, it's really not hitting the mark.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm curious to know what you think in your work in the project. Like, what do you notice about people and their excuses for why they can't bring values to work?
Wow, that's a good one. I think your first point around people just don't really know what they are is a big one. I think it's not. I think there haven't really been good, effective tools and processes for doing values identification and development. You talked about it being inside out. You know, if you search on the web, you can download lists of values, like hundreds and hundreds of values to pick from. You can compare between these two, which would you want, and walk through those types of things, but they're just not effective. That's so outside in that I still think our process, those exercises are the more head-based types of things that you're talking about. So I think the first barrier is people just haven't had a good method to identify their values, which is one of the reasons why we created the Global Values Project and launched our values development and assessment tool. So definitely check that out. It's proven to work from the inside out and engage the heart, like David is talking about. And I think another one is it's kind of scary. Being the only one who shows up at work and tries to do something different. Tries to be the guy that says, you know, I think we can do this. I'm tired of hearing we've never done it that way before, or we tried that once and it didn't work, you know, 20 years ago when we did a poor job of it to begin with, right? It's hard to be that person who steps up and finds the strength and courage and real motivation to take that stand.
Yeah, I think that's a huge point. Values don't disappear. They get trampled on, and over time what happens is they gradually get smaller and quieter because people believe in some really fundamental ideas, right? That, you know, that's just the way it is, things never change. But I think the loss there that ends up happening is this disengagement, right? These record levels of disengagement. It's clearly pointing to an idea that people they're no longer sitting in anything that makes meaning for them. And I don't think you have to be a leader, running a company, running a team. I think whether you're a solo entrepreneur, you work in a small business, I think you can make meaning with everything. You know, values aren't about curing cancer and being a billionaire, although those are all nice things if you want them. You know, values are about a life that is rich and meaningful, where you're not only making money, you are making meaning, and you're leaving your legacy, your teachings, whatever those might be.
So what's the connection here for you, David, and the work that you've done with, especially from the spirituality perspective? What's the connection between values and engagement at work?
Well, let me say it this way. In my personal mentoring work, I do a lot of work with people who show up with big trauma. So I'm talking about everything from life-threatening illnesses to death of a child or a spouse, divorces, things like that. What you notice about cases like that is values shift instantly. You actually don't have to do values work with those people. They show up and they say, you know what, for 25 years I've been on the treadmill, I've been making money, I've been working as a banker in New York or whatever, I just had a stroke. And you know what, I don't value any of that stuff anymore. That's what I mean, like that's a shift, right? But what I'm saying is you don't have to wait for trauma or bad circumstances to come. You can start living inside a value-driven life now, because in fact everything around you, including the company you work in, is nothing but a value.
Absolutely, and if companies could get ahead of that curve and really instill a value-driven culture, think of the trauma, the corporate trauma they could alleviate, not only the internal stuff, but the external publicity nightmares, the poor media coverage, all this stuff. If everybody in a company were able to live from that place of their values, what a different place it would be.
Yeah, I agree. And you know, people say, "Oh, you're a dreamer and you're not practical, and this will never happen." But I'm here to tell you, I really believe that it is practical. A value-driven life is practical in business. It makes sense, gets results, and what we're noticing in this new economy is employees are more and more going to be hired not just for their skill set, but for the values they bring and their ability to work in community together as a shared value. If you look at the successful companies, you'll see there's a very strong ethos there.
Absolutely. I love what you're pointing to. One of the things that we're kicking around is taking a look at the simple function of HR, of onboarding new staff. What if that was done not just from the good stuff that they already do with making sure the skills are there, the qualifications, the experience. That's absolutely important. And it's also only focused on the doing. What can they do? Can they do this task that we're asking them to do? What's completely void in that process in many companies is how are they going to show up? How are they going to be successful? And wouldn't it be powerful if top candidates, those final few that you want to look at, were also screened based on their values and how well their values aligned with what you wanted them to do in the environment that they needed to operate in? Because it's the doing, sure, the resumes and all of that stuff is going to answer the question, can you do what we're asking you to do? But it's really the values piece. If we could uncover that and start bringing in every new person that we brought in was also, we knew they were well equipped to be successful at what they did, that's where the meat is. Because no matter how good or skilled somebody is, they're not pleasant or they're difficult, then they're not going to be successful. And I think it's that the way their being that comes from that place of their values is going to complement the doing that really means you've now got a solid candidate for that role in place. So I think I love what you're talking about here. Values really does have the power to really shift how everybody shows up and gets engaged.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Rob. And it's what you said at the very beginning about, like, gee, can these two worlds, you know, come together? And the truth is, this is how they come together. They support each other.
Mm-hmm.
We're living in a very metric world where we're convinced that if we can measure something, it is of value. And so the global values project and the tool for creating and understanding your values is a very wonderful process, but it's only the first step in a much richer, deeper idea. And so I think when we bring the metrics, the data, and the skills together and we marry them to values, we actually truly have something we can live inside of. You know, when people tell me that they can't honor any of their values at work, then I only have one answer for them. It's like, you then either learn to love the values you're living in, or you have to find something new.
Mm-hmm.
And we see a lot of innovation comes out of that. It comes out of people going, this isn't what I view. I'm going to go create it, like you did, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm assuming that was one of the reasons that you sort of created this whole kind of it's a social movement to me.
Thank you. I hope so. I certainly hope so. It's something I'm absolutely passionate about. I've seen it work, not only for myself personally in my personal life, in my relationships with my significant other, my friends, my family, and in my professional world. Sure, it's fundamental, and you can't leave them at the door and only bring them to work one day a year. You've got to be in them all the time, because that's when you really are fully engaged, absolutely fully engaged.
You told me that delightful story about when you were a boy and working at the sports facility, your first entrepreneurial. I think that's a great story to share, because it kind of shows that it can show up at any age with anybody.
Okay, sure. Yeah, the entrepreneurial spirit struck me at 14 when I started a concession stand at a local ballpark. I grew up in a really small town in southern Indiana in the Floyd's Knobs area. It's a place. Look it up. You can't make stuff like that up. Floyd's Knobs. And a lot of the town life revolved around youth and high school sports. It was that or church, pretty much. That's what you had in small town Indiana. And I wanted to start a concession stand because I felt like, if this was going to be the main focus of our community, let's do all we can to make it awesome. So I couldn't drive yet, so I had to plan trips with Mom to run to the wholesale candy store and pick stuff up. I couldn't use the stove unsupervised yet, so we bought an air popper popcorn machine at a garage sale, and I popped my popcorn ahead of time, and I would go up and set up my concession stand and sell Cokes and candy bars, and it really added so much to the experience and that sense of community and connection that we were all there for. I loved it. I picked up the trash afterward, right? I was really after this bigger picture level of awesome on top of what we already had. And I did this for a couple years, and one year the Parks Department, when I called to say, hey, can I do my concession stand again? And because I was really excited, I was 16 and I could actually drive myself, so it was going to be an awesome summer. They said, we've actually decided to do our own concession stand, and I was crushed. I was really heartbroken because I loved it so much. And sadly, their concession stand closed before the first season was half over. And now as I look back with what I know now, being the age I am and what I've learned and experienced, I see that they were showing up just to make a few bucks for the ball program. And because they didn't really have that intrinsic motivation and engagement that you're talking about, they had problems. Volunteers wouldn't show up, people wouldn't stock things, they would be out of people's favorite items, and so it just didn't click. But I was showing up from a deeper place, and I didn't know it then, but it was a place of these values I had around connection and community and fun and whatever it is that a 14-year-old boy might label them at the time. And what I learned was it actually turned into the vision for my consulting company. It's value-driven outcomes, incredible journeys. When people are properly positioned and motivated from this place of their values, they are going to get great results. All those intangible results that you're talking about, engagement, all these reports about these really hard to quantify ancillary bottom line items like less sick days, higher retention, lower turnover. All these things come into play when people are in that value-driven space. And not only that, you have a great time doing it. You have incredible journeys. It's just so much fun that you're crushed when the Parks Department is going to run their own concession stand. So it really is. I mean, that's the root of the Global Values Project. And if we step back for just a second and look at everything that's going on in the world today with the wars that we're not even calling wars, with what's going on with our food supply and global warming, man, people, we've got some serious things that we have got to get our act together on and stop competing and collaborating. And our current model just is not working. And my hope is that if I can get 10 million people in touch with their values and living those on a daily life and bringing them into play for themselves and their jobs, their families, communities, and then if we can get the other end of the spectrum, businesses who play such a major role in everything that's going on, operating from a more value-driven place, then I think we've got a chance at turning a lot of this stuff around and really creating a value revolution here, because I think that's what we need.
Yeah, it's well said. You know, I think that is true. There are some very pressing human issues that need to be dealt with, and I guess what I'd like people to get a sort of to get a sense of is that, you know, I went away for a reading retreat recently, and after we'd had this conversation about doing this, and I went to a store. I was on a little island, so couldn't get the organic produce, so bought some, you know, nectarines and took them home and, you know, cut them up for breakfast, and they tasted like nothing. They had no taste, no texture, and it hit me in that moment that I was eating not just a piece of fruit, but I was eating a value. The value of the soil, the value of the farmer, the value of the transportation system, the value of the seed. Compared to the organic fruit I normally buy in the city, and when I'm gardening in the summer, the organic food that I grow for myself. So I'd just like to offer to people that, you know, look around. Everything you're connecting with is a value, right? So when we make choices that are in alignment with our own personal values that matter, we're actually also changing the world in a fundamental way. We're saying, I don't want this kind of fruit with poison on it. I value farmers doing things the way my grandparents did, you know, as an example. So I really think when you start looking around, you know, as a change agent, I'm always looking around. I'm seeing values everywhere.
Absolutely. I love what the food analogy is great. It's because we can take our values and put them into practice in everything that we do. Every action we take, every product we buy, every action we don't take, every word we say. If we can align our values with every habit that we've got, suddenly this is really what it gets, this is where it gets back to, it's both a personal evolution because we are building the skills that we need to have ourselves show up as our fullest, truest selves as we do that. And it's also really an act, I see it as an act of revolution because it's those actions that we all take that are going to really take root and make change. Take root was not an intended pun on your food analogy thing, but that really is the genesis of all of it.
Pun. Yeah, I think that's bang on, really. I mean, that's the thing is, you know, when one person stands up and is counted,
yeah,
people say it doesn't make a difference, but look around at our heroes. It does make a difference. Look at Nelson Mandela or any of those kind of people, you know, a Steve Jobs or a Richard Branson, or I'm only talking about the people we know. But people stand up for something, and you know what? Other people follow because they're looking for that. People are looking for a big idea.
Absolutely, and you know that takes me back to what you said earlier about you've had clients tell you, I'm not able to live my values at work. You know what? You are. It might be scary and you might not know how yet, but you are able to. And you don't have to wait for some big corporate program or entity to be rolled out with a lot of fanfare to do it. A recent client example for me comes to mind. It was a director who was having some personnel challenges with a particular person that was really important to not only his success but the whole division, and things just were not going well. We did his values assessment, and suddenly just having what his top 5 values were gave him clarity into, okay, now I see why we're not getting along so well. And it gave him insight into what needed to be brought more presently into the mix in order to resolve it. And it also gave him the motivation, because what he wanted to accomplish and achieve was coming from that inside space. He had the motivation to push through the fear to have that difficult conversation that he really knew all along he needed to have. And that's what happens a lot, is people say, oh, I knew this. But the clarity and the confidence and the motivation that comes to play when you can frame it from this place of your values is really powerful. And he had that conversation. And he reported back, not only are we communicating better and our dynamic is good, I'm less stressed at work. I no longer dread meetings I have with this person. And guess what? Our client backlog, because of our increased efficiency and collaboration, has gone down dramatically. So again, it's those intangible benefits that you're talking about here. So I think I would have to call bullshit on anybody who says, I'm not able to live my values at work. You can. And look for those ripple effects. I not only addressed the specific concern I had, but what else was a byproduct of me showing up that way? This is the revolutionary part, right?
Yeah.
Decreased stress, higher engagement, lower client backlog. These are huge, and those weren't even on the table or discussed as motivators, but they showed up.
Yeah, yeah. You know, the truth is that, you know, a lot of times you can actually identify your high-level values by looking back at your childhood. And so when people bring their kids to work, they're almost looking at a carbon copy of their purer self. Mm. In that pure state, in that state of, you know, I might call it youthful innocence, it's a state of possibilities. And values are always an invitation into possibilities, because we become hypnotized by the idea that things are solid. But in fact, you know, we're doing a Google Hangout, which 15 years ago would have been impossible. Mm-hmm. You know, we're walking around with devices that our grandparents, that would have been impossible. So, but somebody had a value, they had a dream, they valued innovation, or they valued the word possible. And once you realize that everything is connected to everything else, if you've ever done a wheel of life, you know, many people have, it's a standard tool in coaching, you realize that at the center, all the different aspects of your life, whatever the wheel of life is, health, family, relationships, they all connect at the center. They're all connected. And when you live a connected life at the center of your values, my experience is that's where happiness, contentment live. And I don't care what anyone says. That's what we're all looking for.
It is, and you know what? It's a beautiful segue, that connection that you're talking about. We just had a question come in from the Q&A chat from Heather. Thank you, Heather. How can leaders start to connect and balance and incorporate corporate values with personal values to increase employee engagement?
Why don't you take that one?
Yeah. Here's how I see this. Within Revive, within my own company, and we're blessed with being pretty small, lean, and nimble right now, and that does make things easier for sure. So full disclaimer there. But the way we approach this is every collaborator on our team goes through the process of identifying and connecting with their personal core values. We all come up with our top 5. Any more than that's just too cumbersome to deal with. So we pick our top 5. And the process that we go through, again, creates a real connection for the person. It is, those values become an energetic compass. If you're making a decision at work, should I be spending, even something as simple as should I spend my time on this or this, you can actually look to your values to figure out the answer to that question and move ahead with confidence. We also have spent the same, done the same process with our corporate values. So we know the energy and feel and the meaning behind our corporate values. We then are intentional about sitting down with each of us, and we talk about what are the connections, the connects, and the disconnects between my personal values and the corporate values. And this is incredibly powerful for leaders because I think the best way to describe it is it gives leaders not only all those intangible bottom line side effects that you get from an engaged workforce, it gives you peace of mind. Because suddenly you have everybody on your leadership team, or even do it for everybody in your company if you can. You've then got an entire workforce that is connected at a deeply personal level in making decisions in a consistent way, planning, doing strategies, interacting, treating each other the way they want to be treated. You've got an entire workforce that is aligned to your corporate values, but guided to them from this connection that they've got with their personal values. The peace of mind and that gives me is incredible. I don't have to worry about the details. I don't have to micromanage. I don't need status reports and this, that, and the other. We've got pretty bare bone minimum checkpoints and all that dry stuff, the practice and the rigor and the status and all that. It falls by the wayside because I tell you what, if you can spend just a little time up front doing that with your people, you are really engaging your workforce. And you don't have to make up for it on the back end with all that management stuff that doesn't work because you're leading from the front end. That's, I think that's the most powerful and relevant way I've seen leaders really getting that connection and engagement. I've got other ideas, but I don't want to keep going. You got anything to add in here, David?
That's good stuff. Well, I guess I'd add that in the work I do with leaders or entrepreneurs, I'm always looking for them to find the optimal flow state, which is short-term goals, which is where a lot of the data and the crunching and the metrics come in, and long-range vision. And in the middle of those two is the sweet spot. And what I find is values tend to get trampled when people live in a short-term world, short-termism. They stay inside of this very short term, and without the long-range vision, it's harder for leaders to embody the value, and that requires it's like wearing bifocals. It's a bifocal way of thinking. So I think that's critical actually, because if your short-term goals, whatever they may be, do not match your long-range vision, then they are not value-centered. They don't support the long-range vision. So that, to me, is one of the first things one has to do is decide, you know, why are we here?
Mm-hmm.
What are we doing? How are we going to change the world?
Yeah. How are we here? Why are we here as a company? Our corporate values, and why are you here as a person I've hired to fill that seat, right? Yeah. And what's the connection? And so Heather, you know, another very practical thing might be, earlier we talked about hiring from a place of values, including values in your hiring and recruiting processes. There's huge value to be had there too. I also think another reason leaders and companies haven't really taken the leap into values yet is because there haven't. To bring something like values to life in a large entity like a company, you need to have processes and tools and some structures and things that help, like you were saying, David, keep it alive, that nurture it and grow it. And I don't think there have been good tools to do that until recently. But I want to take that excuse off the table right now for anybody who's been relying on that, because with what I really believe what we've done with the Global Values Project and the approach we take to values development and assessment, it's unlike anything out there. And it is no longer an excuse to say, well, it's just not practical, it's not sustainable, there's nothing we can do.
Yeah.
So leaders, check yourself, see if that's really something you're interested in doing. figure out if is it time to give it another try. It might be.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit to that. I mean, that's the reason I was attracted to the Global Values Project, is I saw not only a process, but a journey that people could go through.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big believer that organizations need to bring people in who are not experts in what they do, but who are experts in values and how to generate and create and support and nourish a value-centered organization. So we live in an expert bias, where we think, well, like I'll have someone say, well, I'd like you to coach me, but do you know anything about engineering? I need an engineering coach.
Right.
And the truth is, we often need to step out of our perspective. It's the very problem-solving ways we go about things that keep perpetuating the same problems. So, in fact, the reason I think HR is suffering from some of this stuff is because they actually need to start attacking the problem in a completely new way. And I think the Global's Value Project really is kind of a totally new way of developing things like values building for leaders. And the truth is, everyone is a leader at some point, right? I mean, we all have to lead ourselves somewhere.
Absolutely. Every one of us has the power to show up how we choose to, no matter our level, position, title. We're all leaders everywhere. Yeah. And you're queuing up this, it's an uncanny knack you've got for queuing up write-in questions here, David. We have from Lori Corcuera. From my experience in the corporate world, it's leaders that have the hardest time living and demonstrating their personal and company values. What is your recommendation to keep the leaders accountable to live these values day to day? That's a juicy one.
Wow, that's a big question. I could spend the rest of my life in a cave in Tibet trying to answer that. Again, I really do believe it goes back to the overwhelm and the inertia of details. I think what I notice about entrepreneurs is they stop asking themselves why. Why did I want to do this in the first place? Why am I here? What's the heartbeat of what I'm doing? Because they become so involved in the day-to-day inertia, they can't maybe let go. A lot of leaders have a certain type of style. And it tends to lead to this very kind of myopic vision where they often focus on the nuts and bolts. And we're living in a world now where people they're looking for ideas that matter. Mm-hmm. So I really believe this flow state is where leaders actually start to tune in to this. It's a tuning in process, and it requires, that's why I believe in coaching and mentoring, because I don't see the difference between business and personal life. They're all one, especially for visionaries and entrepreneurs, right? They live and breathe and work. So they need perspective, outside perspectives, outside of the company ethos too. That's why I believe in the work that we're doing.
Yeah, thank you, David. I'll add to that a recent example we had here, Lori. We had one of our team step up and say, hey, and maybe this is an example of how values aren't just necessarily this big, mushy, heartfelt motivator type of thing, this feel-good stuff for engagement. They can be a very practical tool for leading. We had one of our team step up and say, I don't feel, and we can say that in our company because we get what they're saying when they say that. They're talking from a place of their values. I don't feel like something's going well here. I'm not quite sure what it is, but I think it's related to our value of this. And so we had a quick call of the decision makers here in Revive that set our strategy, and we laid that on the table. And we used the approach that we take for values development, which is based in triggers, those things that don't feel right, those things that are off, those things that we leave at the door on 364 days a year that aren't the bring your kids to work day. And we said, okay, well, if it's this, what could it be? And each of us raised what we thought was off for us from a place of our values, in what and how we were approaching this, and what the solutions look like, in what the service delivered. We roundtabled and roundtabled, and it was about an hour and a half call, and it was really intense and focused. But the thing driving it always forward was, where is this off from our values? And again, we had our corporate values to keep us that long-term strategy where we're headed, but we were all speaking from that place of our individual values, so we knew we were still on track. And this was a very practical way that someone on our team called me out on, hey, I don't know if you've noticed, but this isn't working. this is not going well over here. And I got it. And I heard her and I understood it because of that type of conversation that we then were able to have as a whole team on what needed to be done to address it. So values aren't just this big, broad thing that leaders can roll out. It's not a do them once and you're done. It really is something that leaders have to be willing to step up and live, and be willing to be held accountable for, like you're alluding to in your question, by everybody that they're asking to live their values and expecting to show up that way. It's not a one and done thing. It is a way of life. It's a way of work. So I hope that gives you some answers, or at least some food for thought on holding leaders accountable there.
The time thing, what you said, Rob, is a big piece of it, right? Like if you want to be a leader, if you want to be a visionary, carve out some time. Mm-hmm. No more of these, I don't have time, I'm too busy doing this. You know, it's like if you don't take the time now, then the small thing becomes huge in 365 days. And then eventually you're going to be calling people like us in anyways, but you're just going to be saying, what's going on? Oh my God. And
right,
it's like,
right.
well, you know,
you're already to that catastrophic state, that traumatic event, right?
Yeah. So values require time, and you have to make it a priority. Values are as important to me as the production line. Absolutely.
Hey, David, as I look at our time, we've got about 6 minutes left, and we did have a question come in via email ahead of the call, and it was, I wrote it down. What are some of the ways each of you, that means you and me, I think, David, bring your values to work? How appropriate for the topic.
Wow. Well, I've kind of melted my values down into like a 3-word statement. And it's called Sacred Zen Biscuit. And, you know, my overarching value is to try and make the ordinary world sacred for people to find meaning and purpose regardless of what their situation is. That's my overarching value. Zen is my ideas about simplicity. I'm looking for simple solutions that are sustainable. If I can't explain it simply, I probably don't understand it myself. I'm not interested in complicated. And I live my life in a simple way. And Biscuit is my dog over there who's sleeping, and thank God. He's not always that docile. And, you know, he's my value for freshness. You know, he's fresh at every moment. He's never bored. He go play on the beach. It's always like he's doing it for the first time. No memory. It's just like, here we are again. Isn't this beautiful? So I've turned it into a mantra, and a mantra means mind-protecting slogan. And I carry that with me, and that's what I try to do at every moment. So I've tried to melt it down into something that I can bring with me.
I love it, and thank you for sharing your values. I think, you know, we didn't really get into the process or the approach that we take and what it's like, but I can imagine for some people hearing those 3 words spoken as values, they were probably expecting things like honesty and integrity and communication, and then they hear Zen, what? Something biscuit? And they're like, what? But as you were talking, I hope people could see that those values really meant something to you. And that was a great, beautiful example. So thank you for that. I'll try to give a different example, one that's maybe more corporate-y. We in Revive, a lot of companies. When I was a consultant, I helped so many companies with what they call demand management. Like, companies have a ton of projects on their list that they want to do, and they've only got finite resources to deliver on. So how do they figure out which ones are going to get them the most value? And company, you would not believe the hoops and the admin and the research and the business cases and the meetings after meetings that companies go through to develop this plan. Our first pass at demand management for Revive, because man, we've got ideas on our plate, absolutely more than our small lean team can get to, and especially at the rate that we want to. So we've got to be really picky. And our first screen on should we do it or not, and what should we do, is how well does it align with our values. And we revisit our strategy every 6 months, and it is really fascinating to me how different the discussion is when you approach your strategy from your value presence and what it's going to deliver.
Yeah.
Again, that value-driven outcome, instead of looking at what's going to make me the buck, what's going to get me to this metric that I've got set in my personal development plan. It's a metric. It's not going to develop anything. You're just going to meet it or you're not. It's an entirely different discussion. And only once in the 3 years that we've been working on this have we ever said, you know what, I think this is one case where we actually do need to go do a little bit of financial research and figure out what's happening. Only once. There's huge value in values at work in everything. It's not just the interpersonal stuff and the warm and fuzzy. Values can be embedded absolutely in your operational activities to get the same type of benefits that we're talking about on the front end too. That's one way we bring them to life in a very big way at Revive. David, we're just about out of time. Do you have any final closing thoughts, challenges, golden nuggets of wisdom you want to share with our crew?
Golden nuggets. Let me pull a golden nugget out. I said it at the beginning, and I'll reiterate it again. You know, I think we all spend a lot of time in our working lives, and so as you said, that we can bring together a marriage of the hard stuff, the science, the metrics, with the heart-centered approach. And when we do that, we find that people become more engaged, and profit increases, productivity increases, sick days go down. The research is very clear on it. So, if you want your work life to matter, then I think it's really important work to do. And if you're an organization or a leader or working with a team, then invest in a long-range values program. Will pay dividends.
Yeah, thanks, David. I'll just add, if you're an individual, if you're a company, think about this. Figure it out. What's the play for you? And let's have that discussion. And if you're an individual, you don't have any excuses anymore, other than you've just not set aside the time and made it a priority to get in touch with your values. Hit theglobalvaluesproject.com. There's a free online values development and assessment tool you can use. If you really want to get the most out of it, though, work with one of our accredited values professionals. They're trained in how to coach you through the process that David talks to about, that's so important, and you will definitely get deeper, better, more meaningful results if you do work with someone who can give you, like David was saying, that outside perspective. So with that, I think, David,
That was fun. Thank you. That was really inspiring.
Thank you for joining us. I always enjoy connecting with you, David, and I love the stories that you tell. I hope each of you is taking away some little nugget of wisdom that you can take into your workday. And hey, what would be different today if you could bring just a little bit more of one of your values into your workplace? Give it a shot. Find that meaning and connection, and look for that ripple effect that we were talking about. So thank you all. Go out and have value-driven outcomes and incredible journeys. Take care. Choose well.
Thanks.